Ah, huh? So today we will be discussing about something which is very important. That is, just remember the key statements of Galileo. Key statements of Galileo. তুমি বলতে পারো কেন? কারণ হয়েছে যে if you don't remember the key statements of Galileo, then you might forget many more things that will follow. হ্যাঁ, সেই জন্য আমি ঠিক করলাম যে যেহেতু সময় বেশি, যেমন আমাদের নোটস ফলো করতে হবে, গ্যালিলিওর মতন একটা যে পিস, তাকে ম্যানেজ করতে হলে কি করতে হবে, ইটস ভেরি ইম্পর্টেন্ট ফর আস to understand even the key statements that accompanies it. Now, because it is a very complex idea that you'll be discussing it now, so just put it in your mind what I'm saying. Hmm. So on one level, Brecht depicts Galileo as someone who, when faced with the instruments of torture death, would sacrifice their principles and favor survival. So in this way, if you say little bit of difference we do really have about him. The conflict tests Galileo resilience. He's quiet about what is happening with him. He admits that he succumbs to physical pressure and gives in to the church when he sees the instruments of torture. It is hard to be resilient when one sees the instruments of torture before him. So many people refuse to adapt ADAPT to change because they lose power and status. Status over here is the church authorities. Many people, like the church authorities, cling to outdated or traditional views because they fear the erosion of power. That power will go away from their hand. However, Brecht also suggests that we often act in a contradictory ways or may not always be aware of the unintended consequences of our actions. Sometimes we sacrifice our principles that this might turn out for the best. Galileo completes his life's works. The ideological clash between views and values. Conflict often occurs when progressive views held by individuals threaten the status quo, and this is all due to the impact of the institution that is involved in it. In this case, powerful social, political, and religious institutions may react brutally as they seek to defend traditional and conservative views and values. Suppose you want to change the views and values of Ramayana and Mahabharata. What do you think? You sit quiet at home? No. All the critics of Ramayana and Mahabharata will come forward to contradict you. Causes what appears to be a simple clash between science and religion is more complicated. It becomes a clash between a church that is desperate to protect its power base. A temple would do the same thing, a mosque would do the same thing, any Any synagogue would do the same thing. Any place of what you call any place of God, institution of God that is established with the institution of God or religion, and the scientist who wants to empower the peasants and encourage them to take interest in and gain knowledge of a world and ideas that directly affects him. So consequences in such cases, powerful institutions work swiftly to silence individuals who threaten their power base. Often this clash leads to violent threats and personal or professional smear campaigns. This involves a high degree of pain, grief, and suffering on behalf of notable individuals such as Galileo. In many ways, Cardinal Bellarmine, I hope you remember the name, many a times I've said about this person. So, Cardinal Bellarmine, Cardinal Bellarmine and Cardinal Barberini seek to depict Galileo as arrogant because he questions the tensions of higher beings. We have shifted the responsibility for such occurrences. As we understand, life is made up of them to a higher being and argued that all of them contribute to the fulfillment of certain intentions. What I'm saying or lecturing now is very, very important to the understanding of Galileo. That the whole thing is taking place according to a great plan. But now you come along and accuse this higher being of not being quite clear how the stars move, whereas you yourself are. What are the consequences? Suppose you go against the church, you go against any religious institution, consequences will follow. Prophetically, the Inquisitor states, what does he say? And greatness is occasionally a difficult burden for those on whom God has bestowed it. So, greatness is not acceptable. Even you may be religiously great, nobody cares for you. Church pursues a narrow minded and arrogant course to protect its power base, ensures dominance of the people by keeping them ignorant. Galileo, the search for scientific truth, has personal and professional consequences. Virginia becomes a bypasser casualty, victim of Galileo's conflict and must sacrifice her proposed marriage to Ludovico. The other day we discussed about him because of the position adopted by Galileo. The Inquisitor seeks to influence Virginia, hoping that she will pressurize her father. Virginia is preparing for an imminent marriage. The Inquisitor knows that if the earth is more vast than one originally believes, then a cardinal might get lost in such vast distances, and the Almighty might lose sight of the Pope himself. So it is important to remain close to our great Father, whom we all esteem so highly, my dear child, he says. Close to your great Father, that is God, whom we all esteem so highly, my dear child. Galileo prompts, says, the scientist and his theories. Now, Galileo's theory contradicted the church. The Catholic Church believed at the time that the earth was at the center of the God's universe, which reinforced the central position of the Pope in the world. Galileo's views reflect those of Copernicus that the earth is just one planet that it revolves around the sun. Copernicus said it. According to the church, the theory was blasphemous, that goes against the church, God, and inquisitor represents the church, insists that he recant his views. Recant means take away. The church believes that Galileo's theory threatens the authority. Mr. Galileo Ballerman tells us, tonight the Holy Office decided that the doctrine of Copernicus, according to which the sun is motionless and at the center of the cosmos, while the earth moves and is not at the center of the cosmos, is foolish, absurd, heretical, and contrary to our faith against God. But he's wrong. I have been charged to warn you that must abandon this view, he says. Warns everybody. Galileo is entitled to scientific views as long as they are simply a hypothesis. They must not be presented as fact. The cardinal wishes that Galileo would wear his mask for his own protection, and so what? He can appear as a lamb and a good orthodox thinker. The church's theory is that the earth is the center of the universe. The sun revolves around the earth. This means that human beings are the most important thing in God's creation. They are central to God's design. Galileo pursues his interest in science because he believes that eventually the authorities will be forced to recognize the truth. He wants people to understand, as all scientists do, which is, what does he say? Why I go on working and buying expensive books instead of paying the milkman. Galileo was at one time unable to pay the milkman also. But his belief in man's reason is problematic. Galileo hopes that if he continues his work quietly, he will be unnoticed by the authorities. He underestimates the extent of his threat to the authorities. He says, I have written a book about the mechanics of the universe, that is all. What people makes of it or don't make of it isn't my business. Now comes in the Inquisitor. The Inquisitor represents the views of the church authorities. He represents the church. They believe that if the peasants start talking about the phases of Venus, they may even start to question the work of God. They may not see God as responsible for all miracles. Quite naturally true. They are annoyed that Galileo writes his theories of astronomy in the idiom of fishwives and merchants, common people who move around. So if the workers talk about these theories, they will start to question God's authority. Ludovico's theories. We get it in scene 9. His opposition to the Galileo's theory. Ludovico explains the perspective of the landowners and farmers. They do not want the peasant talking about the change to the universe. They believe that it would disrupt their livelihood and the status quo. That is normal divisions. They could be upset if they heard that frivolous attacks on church's sacred doctrines were in the future to go unpunished. Even the ballad singer states, what does he say? For independence spreads like foul diseases. Who wouldn't like to say and do just as he pleases? So there's a clash of ideology, conflict, which involves a clash of interests. Conflict often occurs when progressive views held by individuals threaten the status quo. In this case, powerful social, political, and religious institutions may react brutally as they seek to defend tradition and conservative views and values. Now we may be thinking of our goddesses, Ma Kali, Ma Durga, Can you explain the common man what you want to explain? There are many critics who say that Durga is a robot of the goddesses. So Hindu will go against it if we hear such a thing. They often seek to silence individuals and who threaten their power base. Often this clash leads to violent threats. This involves a high degree of pain, grief, and suffering on behalf of Galileo. Then comes the question of individual response, individual's response to conflict, difficult choices. Someone who does know the truth is just thick headed, blockheaded, nonsense. But someone who does not know it and calls it a lie is a crook. That is how Andrea quotes Galileo's views. Andrea's comments imply that Galileo is a fraud because he does not stick to the truth of the church. Faced with the threat of death, Galileo recants. Recants means confesses. What does he say? Galileo admits that I recanted because I was afraid of physical pain. They showed me the instruments. The second point was that he is depicted as a person who fears for the loss of his life. He is someone who values sensuality and physical nature of life. Third point is that Beck depicts Galileo as someone who loves the simple pleasures of life and does not want to give them up. His food and wine are a constant source of pleasure to him. The Inquisitor rightly concludes that Galileo is a man of flesh and gives in immediately. So you see that Galileo is a man of flesh and blood. A man of flesh and blood is always afraid of what? Of the dangers that lie ahead of him if he does not believe the institution of the church or any religious institutional body. So Galileo is a man of flesh. I would give in immediately. The Pope also describes Galileo as a sensual person. Pope says that he's a sensual person. Why are the persons are so afraid of him? He's sensitive to senses which you and I are not. He enjoys himself more than any man I have ever met. That is what Pope says. His thinking springs from sensuality. What is the response? Galileo believes that he has shamefully compromised his principles and betrayed science. He believes that he has diminished his status in society and he no longer counts himself as a member of the world of science. He says, I betrayed my profession as a scientist. A man who does what I did cannot be tolerated in the ranks of society. It is true. As a scientist, I had a unique opportunity to change things. If one thing had put up a fight, it might have had tremendous repercussions. That is what he believes. He believes that his work could have been as important as the doctor's Hippocratic oath. What is the Hippocratic oath? A doctor takes before he becomes a doctor, declared a doctor. A vow to use their knowledge exclusively for mankind's benefit. That is what it is. Prophetically believes that if scientists are brought to heel by self-interested rulers, then this will cripple science. After Galileo recants, science is paralyzed. Even Andrea noticed It caused a setback most gratifying to the church. That is what she believes. His own daughter. Retrospectively, Galileo believes he should have stuck to his core values and defended his scientific principles. Now, what is his daughter's response? Separate point, she says. Galileo gives Andrea his discourse, DISCORSC, that is called discourse or discourse, COURSC, lectures. Hmm. So you say that the discourses that Andrea Galileo gives Andrea is discourse, which contains many of his new theories that he has been doing in secret. Andrea believes that Galileo has been particularly calculating. He believes that Galileo recanted in order to continue his masterful work and exploration. So he admitted the church, he recanted. Andrea seeks to excuse Galileo's decision by stating that, what does she say? Fearing is death. Fearing death is human. Unnaturally. No, sorry, naturally. Human weaknesses don't matter to science. Andrea praises Galileo and believes that he is, even in matters of ethics, centuries ahead of us. He believes that Galileo has cleverly trumped the enemy. His motto was, as she says, better stained than empty. He has stained his name, but at least his submission has yielded groundbreaking theories. He repeats, you are simply backing out of hopeless political wrangle in order to get in or get on with the real business of science. Galileo has been able to conduct scientific studies on what? On a modest scale under clerical supervision, church supervision. And he states that if he had given in to them at the stake in a halo of flames, the other side would have won. She's true. The impact on others. Virginia, for example, Galileo's theories and exploitation do have an impact upon his daughter Virginia and her marriage to Ludovico. The housekeeper, Mrs. Sarti, criticizes Galileo and tells him that you have no right to trample over your daughter's happiness with your great feat. So, from the story, we draw some best parallels. One is Raif Badawi, capital RAIF, capital BADAWI. Individuals versus state religious dictatorship, state run theology of Saudi Arabia. Individual versus state, religious dictatorship, state run theology. Again, many commentators, such as British conservatives, label climate change denies as the modern day flat earthers. Earth is flat. This cannot be believed in science. Blasphemy laws going against the church. It is a crime to defame Muhammad, Prophet, according to Charlie Hebdo, another great scientist and critics. In countries like Pakistan, Christians are persecuted because they are charged with the crime of blasphemy. In times of conflict, people show us what is worth fighting for. They put an AK-474 into my head, but I laughed at them, says Saud Nofal, a school teacher who stood up to the ISIS ISIS is a terrorist organization from Syria. So in range was another person, Nofal, and the hypocritical, that is Saud Nofal, and the hypocritical religious belief of the ISIS militants that she stood for more than 2 months outside the ISIS headquarters in Raqqa, RAQQA, carrying placards. Each placard criticized the group's ideology and behavior. Show us your religion through decency, compassion, and good deeds was one of such demand. So you see that these conflicts will prevail so long the world exists. There will always be two groups of people. One that will be saying that religious institutions are right and all others are wrong. Science does not stand beside religious institution. Science will go in its science way. But that will not be admitted by all, particularly by so-called fanatics, particularly Muslim fanatics. So we know the consequences of such actions. What can happen? And Galileo was trying to go against these fanatics who believed that Earth was flat, was static, and sun and all other planets, the stars, were moving around it. So these points which I've just now noted here is from the idea of the story, Galileo, which is very complex for the students to keep it in mind. Galileo went against the church. He went against the inquisitor. The inquisitor started disbelieving him. So the church started disbelieving him. And the men of science believed him but were not able to say, if I am a man of science, nobody will believe me. That is true. So this lecture just now which I have delivered to you is the concept of the story Beck had written. Based on this, you see, you have to prepare answers, question answers. But you must remember these facts that I've just now told you. It is very important. If you try to exit from the fact and try to propound the theory that you think you are right and all others are wrong, then you are wrong. You have to believe that what had happened to Galileo really. He might have stolen the telescope theory. Okay. We don't have any real evidence of it, but we have it into the story of Galileo's life. It was not stolen, it was given to him by someone. He developed on it and he developed a telescope. That is not called stolen. All ideas in the world that we come across is then stolen. We cannot believe in that way because ideas, actually, it is like bricks upon bricks that go to make up a great wall. So ideas are bricks and nothing else. So this lecture is very important for you to understand because that makes you understand the whole story that you have been reading about Galileo.